What's up, everyone? My name is Wes, and you're listening to the Ear Coffee Podcast. For today's episode, we finally had Minneapolis singer-songwriter Zaq Baker on the show. Zaq and I chatted about his prolific past few years and the handful of projects he's released, his forthcoming new album, how his writing process has grown, and a whole lot more. Without further ado, here's my interview with Zaq Baker on the Ear Coffee Podcast. How are you doing on this Saturday morning?
I'm good. I'm well. 2 cups of coffee, third one in front of me.
Yes, third cup of coffee for both of us, I believe.
It's a beautiful November day.
So, a little less chilly than normal, so that's something to appreciate. So in order to just familiarize anyone who's listening, I'm assuming anyone that clicked the play button at least kind of knows who you are, but let's get a little bit of a brief introduction. I already said your name, but what do we need to know about you just to kind of get things going?
The intro level. Oh, that's fun. Well, I'm a songwriter. I sing. I play piano. Those are all my core traits.
Those are the core ones.
Presumably, those are the things we're going to be talking about today.
Those are at least 3 of the things we'll be talking about today.
It's the most basic level intro, but...
Well, it's like when you're talking to just one person, you can't be like... Guitar or bass, it's like you do all the stuff.
Yeah.
At least the core stuff.
And I'm a big arranger. I'm very neurotic about how other people play their instruments. So to the extent that that's worth mentioning, that's a big part of my music.
I think for this, the album that we're going to be spending some time talking about today, that's not a bad thing to mention.
Big piece.
Piece. I find that pretty much anyone who has made music some part of their career or is some passion of theirs, they've pursued it. It's been a very important part of their life for a very long time. So just to kind of get an understanding of where your musical origins may have began, what were some of your first and really formative experiences with music, whether growing up or maybe later on in life, but the experiences or artists that you heard or had and you just really were inspired to start playing music yourself, eventually writing, performing, doing all of the things that you just mentioned that you do and that we'll talk some more about. But what really kind of set you on this path?
Yeah, that's a fun question. Well, if you play piano, people kind of assume that you grew up taking lessons, which for me is accurate. It's not the same as like pursuing guitar around the age of 15 or 16. So my parents had me start taking lessons when I was probably 5. Which I think is good. I think like ear stuff is good to instill when you're younger. I'm very fond of telling this story. My teacher quit me when I was like 11. She dumped me. She was like, I don't think we should do this anymore.
Your piano teacher broke up with you.
Yeah. Literally, like that was my first, true heartbreak experience. Yeah, literally. No, she was like, it's you.
Oh, brutal.
I would never practice, so she would give me sheet music, which I absolutely abhorred doing, and then when the lesson happened, I would just have her play the piece that I was supposed to play, and then I would just play it back by ear. And I think she got really tired of being like, I come all this way and you clearly don't do any of your like homework in between. Yeah. So I think that was around 11, and I think that age is probably the age where a lot of people figure out like what it is they're interested in. I think that's really formative. So around the same time, it was like Green Day. Like for me, that was when American Idiot came out. And I remember thinking the melodies were so amazing. And the lyrics at the time were like, oh my God, he's saying the F word. And it's like,
he's saying subversive. The other F word.
Yeah, he's saying all the F words. But I just remember loving those melodies so much, and that's probably something that will always be there. I think everybody has those influences you can't really even extricate from how you see music. It's just like in there. So
yeah, it's just like it's something that even if you don't end up making any kind of like pop punk, like rock opera about George W. Bush, that's just still in your musical DNA, and you might have to like pull out the microscope to see it, but it's in there.
Yeah, it's in there. Actually, so the other formative thing that feels that way is literally just pop radio. It's like whatever classic rock station, and then most often like probably Cities 97. Just like when I was a little kid in the minivan, like whatever was playing that had that like late 90s, early 2000s melody thing. That's always in there. And I do get that sometimes at shows. People are like, I can tell that's like part of your thing. And it's like, I'm not even trying.
Yeah.
It's just, like you said,
That's
DNA.
just how it is.
DNA.
Yeah.
So I think of that being like a little kid in the backseat of the car. And I think most people have that. They're like, my dad would play these records. And so you just are like exposed.
Yeah. Even if it's like someone who doesn't make music, I think you can learn a lot about a person based on like what music they were either shown or just gravitated towards.
Right.
Especially around like the age of like 11. If you're like 5 or 6, you kind of don't really know what's going on yet. And that's a beautiful place to be when you're there. But you don't like appreciate things in the same way. But once you kind of start hitting adolescence, then that's somewhere in, I think, the age when something like the melodies of something would actually really stand out. You kind of be able to distinguish like, oh, I like this part of the song. I like these elements instead of just, I like the song that my mom sings or that my dad plays before bed or when you're like really little.
Yeah. I remember this old Daft Punk interview where they talk about that, like with Discovery. That's what they were trying to make. They were like, we want to make something that resonates with like that part of you. Like before you know how it's made or what it's about, you just feel it in like this little kid way. And I remember learning that and I was like, that makes sense. Especially with samples. It's like, that's what they did, you know?
And just, we could go into a whole Daft Punk side
I was
tangent.
like, we probably shouldn't even start because that's a whole other podcast.
We both kind of paused and thought about it. We're like,
should we start? Probably not.
There's a whole separate series meant for that we can save that for.
That's a rabbit hole I'd be down to do, honestly.
Yeah, honestly. On top of just like learning piano and kind of first absorbing a lot of that music, when did you really, connect with music in a way where you thought about maybe just first performing it and then maybe this is at the same time, maybe this is later, but also writing it, whether like compositionally and arrangement wise, just the instruments or lyrics and songwriting as well? Just when did those aspects of music really kind of take hold of your musical brain? And because that's what brought you here, and we're about to talk about your songs, so it had to start somewhere.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I started playing in bands in high school. I remember like 9th grade or maybe 10th grade, there was like a pop punk band that already had 5 people in it, and they were like, we want somebody that plays piano. And I was like, absolutely, because that was already the way I saw music. It was kind of that like punk rock ethos of like, I want to do it myself. Mm-hmm. I want to learn it by like doing it and failing and being like original and I guess fierce in whatever way that means when you're like 14, like I'm going to do it myself.
I'm going to make something.
Yeah. And I feel like I've always had that. So that's when that was like this is my thing. I really like being on stage. I actually like rehearsing. I like working with other people. But I didn't get very serious about the business of songwriting until I was like 23.
Okay.
And once I started doing that, I was like, I want to just try to get really good at this by doing it a lot. Mm-hmm. And I made that my thing way more than piano. Like I almost put piano aside as a craft for probably the next like 4 or 5 years after that, up until somewhat recently. And it was more like, I want to sit down and I want to do like song structure and song concepts and like edit these lyrics so ruthlessly till it all kind of like makes sense to me as a story. But yeah, that didn't start until I was like 23. I think a lot of people start songwriting when they're younger.
Yeah, sometimes it happens a bit more naturally when you're talking to someone who's only in like their late teens, early 20s, where maybe like they've only just kind of began diving into that. And like, yeah, I played guitar for like 8 years, but this is like, I didn't really start writing songs the last couple of years. And then they start a punk band and then they end up on a sad little podcast. And 4 years later, we're still doing it. But you've at least been working on music for a lot longer. And I didn't find this out until we were trying to figure out how long you've been in some of your other bands. And I had to go onto your Facebook. And
documentation.
I'm not going to like pull up receipts or anything, but was your first kind of like more legitimate band, I guess, like one is at least still ongoing
trajectory, they say.
Outside of your solo and just you writing for yourself. But Maria and the Coins, was that like your first kind of, I guess, more long running musical project? And how did you go from kind of where you were at before that, just first starting to develop into songwriting and playing piano and kind of fill in the gaps? Because Zaq Baker as a musical moniker that also happens to be your name, didn't begin until about 2017 or so. So that's a good 4 years of just playing in like a more supporting role. Were you also writing songs at that time? How did you kind of balance working on that with Marie and the Coins and everything? Just fill in the musical gaps for that kind of period there.
No, totally. Marie and the Coins is like my heritage and an extremely large part of the current work that I do in music. I mean, more than anything, that band is where I got really serious about like the way that music is arranged and the way that it's structured. So Maria would bring these like really well-written songs to rehearsal. She and I have always shared a mindset that music is probably a little bit more theater than it is anything else, you know? Like everything I write is like in support of a story. And at risk of speaking for her, you know, that's something that we've always shared. So then, yeah, it was like 4 years of just gigging like constantly. You know what I mean? It was like we would do shows all the time. I did a ton of booking. Like we never really stopped rehearsing, even when we didn't have something like immediately afterward. It was like we just want to rehearse all the time and get really good at this. So then, yeah, in like 17, I started like writing songs for that band because I felt like I couldn't help it. And then I realized that I was like starting to bring too many of those to the table. And I was like, okay, it's time to just like do my thing.
Yeah.
Because the output was like crazy. Once I figured out that's what I wanted to do, it was like, suddenly there's like a dozen like fully written songs that I keep like editing like crazy. And it's just, they need to be put somewhere where they can have like their day in the sun.
Yeah. Was that after a few years of playing with Marie and the Coins and gigging before you really started like prolifically at least writing songs? Like, was that like 2015, do you have a rough timeline?
Well, I mean, Maria and I started playing together in like 2013, which is really crazy to think about now. So we were both in college and she was just like, you play piano. I need someone to do these gigs with me. And so that's how it was in college. There was probably like a year after college where we were inactive, and then we kind of like reformed this band, and we were like, this is like a trajectory thing. We're going to make like a proper band and book shows in town all the time. And so, yeah, I think that would have been like 3-ish years of that before I was like, songwriting is where I really want to try and make that like a craft as well.
Yeah. First Zaq Baker release was towards the end of 2017. That was about when you said you started just having almost too many songs to bring to a separate project. It's not selfish because it's just releasing your own music. So like I'm hoarding them. At least that's when you started putting some more focus towards that. With that initial EP and even your first album, which came out about a half year later in the summer of 2018, with both Housewarming and Getting Younger. Just talk a little bit about kind of what you remember from that time as a songwriter, as a musician, and also what's something you can still appreciate about, even if it isn't like a specific thing about either of those releases. I don't know how often you go back and revisit your own stuff, because I know that's just always tough for any artist to revisit their previous stuff. But what's something you can still look back with some fondness about from that kind of era of your songwriting process, of you as an artist and as a musician?
Yeah, well, I mean, I still play a handful of those songs really regularly at shows, not least because people already know them and they like them. And it's always touching to see people like singing along. And there is like an interesting angle on Pride from saying like, I wrote this when I felt like I was a different person, just like maturity wise, both musically and as a person. And then saying like, this is like by most standards of my own, like an okay song.
Yeah.
It's like the lyrics all hang together. There's nice melodies and like people like it. And I think it's fun to revitalize that at shows, you know? So that's something that I find like satisfying.
That's almost kind of unique, because I know the kind of stereotype is that, especially for like a lot of bands that might have like one song that's like well known or that blew them up. They're like Creep. You
talk about Creep.
Greatest,
it's like a whole thing.
You're Killing Me for a local angle, where it's like everyone's like, play the single, play the hit.
Right.
And artists or musicians could like feel burdened by that. We're like, they feel obligated to play the old stuff, even if they've moved beyond that. Which is why I like asking that question. So that's a unique answer where you still have, I mean, not only are playing those songs still and just maintaining that connection with the songs and with the audience through those songs. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, like, there's a lot of different angles you can see how you fit into music. And I think, to me at least, there's almost a separation between being an artist and being a performer. So when you put your artist hat on, it's like, I'm always trying to make new things. I'm always trying to see things in a different way and be like really type A about making something new. But as a performer, it's like, we've arranged this song in a way that people actually seem to like. And it's like, give them what they want. You know what I mean? I think there's always a place for that.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's also just like really fun. Being a performer is fun.
Yes. I want that to be true for every performer. And I feel like that is true for probably most, hopefully most. But I'm sure, like, if you ask like one of the members of like Kiss or something, do you still like performing? It's like, even though you're like 80 and haven't made good music ever. Sorry, I just want to shoehorn the fact that I hate Kiss into this because they just came out with a new reissue and I think they suck. Yeah. Another tangent we don't need to go down. How has your your very intentional songwriting process where you're just kind of trying to constantly create, how has that changed since you first made songwriting at least a really key, if not the key, like artistic pursuit you were going after? How has that process changed from those first couple of releases, first batches of songs over time? Have you maintained that prolificness? Because when we talked over email about a year ago, I remember you mentioned that you've written hundreds and hundreds of songs over the course of like, it was up until when I sent the email. So it wasn't like there was an actual cutoff. It was between 2017 and I guess like the day you replied to that email. So it very well may have continued.
I've written even more emails than songs, at the end of the day.
I think that's unfortunately true for most people, just given how society works with emails. But how has that process changed over the years? And how has it changed, or has it stayed the same? Because I'm sure even if you're maintaining a certain like degree of like prolificness, I'm sure how you've approached these songs, have you found new ways to try things and new song approaches that you're interested in or want to try. So just trying to talk about the evolution of that, or even some parts that have remained pretty static over the course of like the 4 or 5 years that you've just been cranking out songs, whether they've been released or many that are still in the vault.
Yeah, well, the vault is huge, and I think most people that have made any kind of art can relate to that. It's like, I might not show this to anybody ever, or I might like edit it and turn it into something good. Yeah, I mean, there was a while where I wasn't really like willing to admit this, but I definitely had like a major long slump in writing that started at the beginning of 2020, not as like related to coronavirus, like January. And it was just kind of like I was really depressed at the time. And I remember being convinced that like I have nothing left to write about. Like there was so much like emptiness inside me that I was like, there's nothing worth doing that's going to come out of my like brain that is going to happen. And so over the course of that year, I only wrote a small handful of songs. And then there's like this total 180 that has also been not writing, which is that I've been so freaking busy that it's actually like, I think for those couple years, I set up my life in a way that there was always a lot of daytime to like chop and just like write music all the time. And now it's like I do freelance piano stuff way more than I do that. And so there's like the Zaq Baker like personality that I make time for that, but that's no longer the dominant force in how I approach music, which makes me feel like a grown-up or something. It's like, people need me to do stuff. I better do that.
I'm a professional instead of just someone who makes art for their own gratification.
Right, and I don't think making art is actually indulgent. That's a pretty sincere stance that I have, but it is different. There's a difference between doing your own art and then having people say also like, we want you to play piano on this thing on Wednesday, And
then showing up and being ready for that.
Like, doing your homework,
I think there's ways to go about creating art without feeling like it's indulgent, but also without like shirking actual responsibilities. Like you're not being a true artist just because like you skipped out on a bunch of things you had on your Google Calendar, even if you wrote a cool song. But also maybe that's what you need to do at the time. It's not, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, no, totally.
That's an interesting realization. Is kind of you're kind of back with piano now. It sounds like, even if it's more like gigging, teaching, or like other roles or whatever, whatever they may be. Versus songwriting, you've kind of just come full circle back to focusing on piano.
No, that's a good way to put it, because I think there was a few years where I didn't take the actual like playing of the instrument very seriously. And I think part of that was just like I can play by instinct and it's fun, but I was thinking more about like music than piano. Mm-hmm. So if there was one benefit to that year of isolation, it was like it's probably a time to sit down, play with a metronome more, work on dynamics more, like actual technique.
Yeah.
I'm resistant to even saying the phrase music theory, but there was a few times where I was like, I should Google like what it's called when I do this, so that when society roars back in action, I can communicate better with other players. So yeah, like you said, it was like a full circle thing. Like I'm going to take this seriously again.
Yeah. I think having just played with enough like jazz musicians over the years, I think that knowing the theory can often be like the cherry on top sometimes, because if everyone can be on the same page like instinctively, and the chords are all changing like they're supposed to, and everyone's on the same page, especially like if someone like you're like the band leader, I guess, since they're your songs and you're driving those chord changes. You don't have to know what, like if it's a 1-4-5 or something, but it helps if you do sometimes. So I relate to that kind of reappreciation for sometimes the labeling does kind of help with the music theory side of things.
Yeah, well, and I think you know this about me already, but it's like I place such a high premium on communicating clearly, like not being a communicator in an ornate way, but being like blunt. Like I'm going to find a good way to tell you what I mean. And so that was like a weird gap where it's like I'm telling people chords and mapping them out in a way that was not actually very helpful. Mm-hmm. And so that was a maturity thing, was like, I'm going to Google like what it's called to write a slash chord in a way that like a guitarist doesn't have to guess what you mean.
Yeah, and they're able to more immediately actually respond to what you're asking or communicate and just engage with each other musically, instead of just being like, I hope this is kind of what we're looking for, and then it works out, but it's in limbo for a little bit.
Right. Yeah, totally.
So just kind of retroactively going, you mentioned just kind of having a creative dry spell throughout a lot of 2020. Around that time was kind of when you reactivated at least releasing music with the Good Kid Manic Summer. You had the couple of videos you put out that I know we talked about in the email interview. But outside of those couple singles, there wasn't anything until end of 2020, where you had pretty much back-to-back releases.
Yeah.
And you had Cardio, which came in December of 2020, which I guess you would call your second album.
Yeah.
It's kind of unimportant, where it's like EP versus album, when it's all like a bunch of like 20 to 30 minute releases of like 7 to 9 songs or so. And it's more just like I have to pick one for Spotify to like promote properly, and that's just the world that we live in. But we'll call Cardio an album. And then in February, just shortly after that, you had the Maddie's Delivery Service EP. Would you still call that an EP?
I would. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
You had both of those at least coming out, and there was a relatively prolific streak of at least recording and releasing music, even if these were songs that had been written prior. So yeah, just talk a little bit about where you found those songs and your kind of backlog of writing, and how those two releases came together, especially so closely together after really only a few songs, and like gigging, of course, over the few, like since 2018. These were the first, I guess, more substantive releases since then.
Yeah. I think everybody that's ever made a record can relate to this, but there were so many clerical parts of those 13 songs that got kind of like protracted over time. So we started pre-producing. I call the whole package Baker Floral, because it was the same sessions. So all 13 songs on Cardio and Maddie's Delivery Service were the same band, same piano, generally the same vocal sessions, same string sessions. So we started pre-producing that in 2019. And Colin, who engineered those records, he would come to a bunch of the rehearsals. We'd have these long meetings about like, let's make sure we get this done in the right way. Talk about a detailed email. Like it was like, here's the order we're going to try to live track and like schedule time. We did a lot of it at a church, which was really fun.
Oh, cool.
So we ended up live tracking the band over Labor Day weekend 2019. And then I came back and did all the grand piano in October 2019 at the same church. And then we had a bunch of like tuning issues that involved like some retracking. And I think that's a demon that comes with grand piano, which is cool because it's an exciting problem to solve. But at the time I was like, it was unpleasant.
Yeah.
But so that was like a bit of an extension. And then we did all the strings, I think January 2020, if I have my timeline right.
Mm-hmm.
COVID happens. Literally the same couple days we were going to do all the lead vocals. So those got pushed back, I think 3 or 4 months. And we ended up laying down the vocals in July, doing harmonies in probably July or August, and then mixing in like September, October.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm remembering all of this correctly. But that's like how it goes. It's like it wanted to be carefully made. The songs were written largely in either 2017 or early 2019. And it was like, I want to do these, the honor of doing it right. And that involved a lot of like coming in separately and doing stuff right.
Yeah.
So it takes
taking the extra time.
Yeah.
And giving it the care. Yeah.
Especially with full band stuff. It's just, there's so many like literal moving parts and they are rock records. So it's like, you want it to have some teeth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fun, honestly. Making records is fun. I'm a perfectionist, but it's like you're literally playing instruments loud, so they sound
and
good.
Then later, maybe people get to hear it too.
Yeah.
They get to buy a CD or something.
Release, So that was part of that. It just was extended, which was, at the end of the day, that's actually kind of gratifying. Like I have something to work on during this like empty time in everybody's life.
Yeah, we're songwriting. I mean, on top of everything for everybody, but at least for you, where songwriting wasn't quite as much of a priority.
Totally.
When you were even, I guess, first conceptualizing these releases, EP, album, how did you find these songs to kind of fit together? Because I remember you mentioned that when you're kind of assembling a release, especially given just how many potential songs you have to like pull from, or like, oh, maybe this one will work, and you just have the vault. You want them to be thematically kind of have a shared connection, but then still have their own distinct stories. Does that still kind of hold true for you in general, and especially for these two? Is that kind of the selection process for each of these? And how did you decide to like make them separate but still kind of packaged together? When did that idea first start formulating, even as you were really getting into recording and kind of the more nitty-gritty elements of making these happen instead of just having them sit as songs or as staples in the live set or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I think you put it better than I could. Like you want them
paraphrasing a quote from you. So I was trying to find the quote, and I'm like, I don't want to just have there be dead air. So
my own words. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the idea that I wanted to have with Cardio and Maddie's delivery service was have it be like a inhale, exhale thing.
Okay.
Have them complement each other. So Cardio, like, unless I'm mistaken, all the songs are in first person, and 6 out of 8 of them are like love songs, and they have a very like either puppy love or heartbreak flavor. So they're very, to me, like young in the actual writing flavor, and they're all like me, and that's not like, they're not entirely confessional, but when someone's listening to it, that's like the narrator is like, this happened to me.
Inhabiting maybe they think it's fictional. Maybe they just assume it's you by default, because whenever anyone sings in first person, it's easy to just connect the very close together dots. You're like, oh, that person said I. It must be them.
So that was like the narrator angle, and the flavor is like love songs, hence the album title. And then there was 2 songs. Tetris, I'm honestly very proud of, just out of all the material I've ever like written or finished. and that's like a mental health song, and so is the last song on the record. So my hope is that those at least make the album a little more mature, have some like lasting value. And then Maddie's is like all fiction, and I think it's all third person. And to me, that album is like, in my mind, musical theater. It's like there are these stories about entirely fictional characters that are going through something. None of it is like I, me, like my thing.
Yeah.
And none of them are love songs. And so to me, it's a very different flavor from the narrator perspective of like, what do I hear when I'm hearing this?
Yeah.
But they're all recorded in the same session. So that's like it's very thematic.
Yeah. It's naturally kind of like a non-tangible connection where they're not packaged together in any way, shape, or form, but they're intrinsically connected just because they were created at the same time, or in most specific in the same sessions. Continuing on to your new album, which is as of yet untitled.
There's a title. I'm just
okay.
secretive.
I keep on thinking that you said it's untitled, but you just said that you're not disclosing the title.
I just like to be secretive.
You're being secretive. So it is titled. We just don't know what it is yet. That is what we mean by untitled. So with those songs, where did those first kind of start germinating together as a release? Are those also songs pulled from that massive collection of songs written between like 2017 and 2020? Are those more recent? When did these songs kind of inhabit themselves, and when did they first start kind of becoming more fully realized?
I think I wrote most of the songs on this next record in 2019. I was so busy then that it kind of like allowed me to flourish more on the writing, because I was just like super manic. There was like so much going on. We were making Cardio, so we're like working really hard on pre-producing all of those songs. Went on this little tour. It was like constant gigs, constant rehearsals, a lot of partying. Like it was just like a very, very good year in terms of like life energy. And so then during the daytime when I was alone, I was just like, I have so much to write about. I have so much that I'm thinking about. It was a very emotionally heightened period. So that's where most of the inspiration came from. And then I think 3 of the songs were in the very infrequent like bursts of creativity in 2020. So those were kind of like different in that way, at least from where I'm coming from emotionally. And then I edited a lot of it like right before the sessions, where I was like, I'm going to lay this down. It's like a composition. I need to make it perfect.
Let's get the finishing touches. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was like almost exactly a year ago. I was going through and like changing some of the words and stuff like that.
What stood out about these songs when you were, besides the kind of like the thematic connections, when you were first kind of, again, conceptualizing this record? And did you find it challenging to kind of select these? This is kind of a broader question, but with so many songs getting written, at least during that period, does that make it more difficult to find songs to kind of group together for a release, or just kind of discover the connections that might unite a group of songs as like an EP or an album? Or does that make it easier, where you're just like, oh, I have all these folders full of demos, or all these lyric notebooks, or however you keep things categorized, and you can just kind of flip through them and like, oh, let's set aside this one, let's bookmark this one. And does that make it easier to kind of find songs to put together? And specifically with this new record, what was kind of the case with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think for me, like so much of the writing is about thematic perfectionism, like having things literally make sense as a story. And it's this very ruthless editing process.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, whenever I pick anything, whether it's to show a band or to perform, it needs to just make me emotionally excited. So it's like I picked through all these notebooks of all this, I don't want to call it junk, but just like material. And at the end of the day, it's like, no, this one, like I feel something when I hear it with fresh ears. And
looking
so really
back, this still connects. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Or sometimes it's like a melody thing, or I don't know what, but that is what makes me feel like I want to choose them. And then I think the only other thing is like anyone that's written anything can relate to this. Like there's always a ton of overlap. Like I go back at what I wrote in a certain period. I'm like, these are 4 songs. They're kind of about like the same person, you know, because I was actually feeling that at that time. And then it's like, how do you condense that and make it not
Kind of redundant.
repetitive? Yeah, exactly.
Like, can these 4 songs be condensed into one good song, or is one of these 4 a little bit stronger than the other 3, and then with some editing, it'll be ready to go, or like that kind of approach? What was something you learned about your songwriting process with these songs specifically that really stood out with just the assembly and the arrangement and the whole process of this album versus any of the prior things that actually have come out and been released, or even songs that maybe have gone unrecorded but have been performed live? Because especially for someone who writes and has written as much as you, I imagine that there's plenty of overlap, but there's also, I'm sure, some songs that have made it out live but have not made it onto record yet. But what's something with these songs that really you can only say is true about these songs, or that you learned about yourself as an artist or as a songwriter with this batch of songs? Again, batch of songs.
There you go. I mean, I think largely as a result of starting anew to take the piano more seriously as an instrument, to me, and I say this with like as little pretense as possible, they feel more like compositions.
Okay.
I feel as though I was doing a lot more with like how the actual piano is doing some of the storytelling, just chord to chord, structurally, than I had been doing in the past. And maybe that's the kind of thing that only I notice. But to me, it's a very stark difference.
Did that realization influence your decision to have the record be almost entirely just piano with potentially just like string augmentation? Or was that something that you found worked best for the songs once you started spending more time with the arrangement, or talking with Jillian, who played strings on the record and did all of the... Was it just violin, or were there some other string?
It was like a full...
It was a full quartet.
Yeah, we've been saying expanded quartet.
Expanded quartet.
Because I said quartet once, and she was like, actually, we did even more than that. So she'll dub like an entire strings section, and it's awesome. Okay. And they'll double some of it, too, so there's like violins going. It's so tight. It's so tight.
I love that, yeah.
It's really cool.
But was that kind of spareness of a lot of songs where it's either almost entirely piano, or piano and strings, expanded string section? Did you realize that that was something that fit these songs retroactively, or kind of where did the idea to have it be such a just kind of soloistic record come about?
I think I'm thinking 3 different reasons right now. I think for one, and this almost speaks for itself once people hear it, but the lyrics to me are so intimate that it just makes sense to have that intensity that comes from really sparse instrumentation.
Having someone like almost sing in your ear.
Yeah.
Just a voice and piano. Just a voice and piano.
Yeah, it's intense because then it's like sonically very upfront. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing, to go back to that piece of the actual piano, the way I play, I think, encompasses like the actual octave range of the instrument, which during one of the pre-production meetings, like we were talking about how for an engineer, that's kind of an exciting challenge to say like, this is going to take up the same sonic landscape that any record would when you're listening to it, but it's all with one instrument, which I think is kind of like a fun, how do you fill out this thing without just staying mid-range, in just a couple octaves, because you know that someone's going to be playing bass guitar and everything else. And I had a third reason, which is that I didn't want to make like whatever number album, like 3rd or 4th, that feels like a kind of pop punky rock record, because I've done that. And so to me, it was like, I would rather have something that's like, so is this one going to be like the other ones, like musically? And so to me, that was an exciting step in a different direction. Okay. Which again, feels like a maturity thing. I hope, I don't know.
Well, that's the thing with artistic growth. When you're kind of in the midst of it, you can look back at the stuff that's already happened and maybe make some assessments about that, but it's often harder to make at least truthful assessments about like, yeah, this is the stuff that I'm actively working on or just finished working on and I'm now working on releasing. Like, you're still very much in the throes of it.
Yeah.
And I think even having like a 3-reason breakdown can be show some good self-awareness for the release. So yeah, I think that's something that comes with just continually working on songs and artistic growth.
I am self-aware, which makes depression like way worse. It's so bad.
Like, I know why I'm like this, but I don't know how to stop it.
Yeah. Oh, and then the fourth reason is that the coronavirus happened.
There's that.
So doing a solo record is hardly something that is unique to me. But in retrospect, that
you're the one in the room that I'm talking to, so it is.
So true. Yeah, right. Of the people at this table.
Yeah.
But that was somewhat obviously one of the reasons also why it was just doing grand piano and vocals in an isolated 2 booths and then doing all the strings. A lot of long phone calls, emails, and spreadsheets, and then doing that otherwise remotely.
Yeah. COVID's kind of like the unspoken like character in any interview about any album or music made in this period. You're like, it played a part, but we don't want to talk about how it did because it affected everybody.
Yeah. No, totally.
My kind of assessment, at least just based on a few cursory listens, is, I mean, and this also kind of feels like it's a categorization or descriptor of a lot of your music, but it's always very wordplay driven. And I think that is something that the sparse, the soloistic nature of it lends itself to, with it just being you. And I just wrote down the phrase self-deprecating yet earnest. I don't know if that was something that must have stood out just at one point during one song, but it felt like, oh, this kind of, at least to my ears, summarizes how I'm hearing them. Where it's that same self-awareness a little bit, but in a way it's presented partially in like a kind of taking the seriousness out of it to create some levity, but also still being very forthright emotionally and very earnest, where you're kind of, depending on where we're at in the song, can cover both bases without just being like, nope, I only have to do one. Like, this song is the ironic one, or the not ironic, but this is the one that's a little bit more tongue in cheek, and this is the one that's the like heartbroken ballad. It's like you can kind of fit both into a song when, whereas a lot of times, yeah, it's just kind of stuck with one or the other. What were some things that stood out to you, like lyrically, when you were writing this record? What are some of the things that, I guess, especially listening to it now that's all been tracked and recorded and mixed, what are some of those things that stand out to you? Because I just told you what I heard and what kind of stood out to me, at least initially, but I want to hear what still stands out to you lyrically specifically, and as the person who wrote and has sang all of these words.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate what you said. You know, I hope all of that is true. And I mean, I think you're totally right. I guess something that I do feel is noticeable, if not satisfying, is to look back on a time when, you know, anybody that's been mentally ill understands, which is that those really negative experiences feel totally ineffable, and they feel bigger than you are, and it's really, really, really terrifying and isolating. And so I think for me to say like that was actually distilled into like verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, chorus, chorus out. It's like that is actually crazy. It's like, and it makes it less scary when you actually listen back to it. And to me, that is wild. And I don't know that it's something I would have anticipated. How's that?
Yeah, I think that answers that.
Yeah, I don't know.
This is kind of still related to the album, but as of the day that we're talking right now, you've released 3 singles in advance of this album, and there will be a 4th coming relatively soon. As far as I've been able to discern, none of those songs are going to be on the album.
That's right.
Yep. And I think we might have talked about this in our prior email interview, just with how some of the different like loose songs you've put out, or even some of the Good Kid, Manic Summer tracks. But what was the decision to put these 4 songs out, kind of almost building up attention for an album, even if they aren't like, you're not marketing it as such, and that's kind of the weird part of marketing, where you're like, it's only associated with an album kind of naturally. And I'm saying that as someone who knows that there's an album, whereas I'm guessing most of your other friends and followers and whatnot are not, at least currently, aware that it's coming at a relatively soon date. But what was the decision for these 4 songs to be released just as singles in general, especially given that it's kind of in build up to an album? And also very briefly that we can touch on just where did these songs kind of come from in the vault in your timeline and of songwriting, and when did they kind of come about? I think we can cover all of that.
Yeah, I was like, multiple questions.
Joe sent me a TikTok that basically just like roasted the hell out of podcasters.
Trying to interview somebody.
And it's like a 2-minute build up to a question. And they just keep on adding facets to the question. And I totally do that. So I'm sorry, but hopefully you understood enough of that, or I made enough sense for you to answer. But if you need to repeat anything, I can do that.
Well, or we could do the other side, which is that like you can ask me anything you want and I'll just respond by talking about what I want to talk about. Which politicians and artists both is like, here are my 5 points that I came here to, like, we could do that.
Like, and it's like, if you can tangentially, like even in the longest stretch, pretend like they're connected. You're like, well, you said this, but I'm going to talk about this that's kind of related, but not really.
Yeah. What was the actual? Oh, the singles.
Yes, just the 4 singles. None of them are on the album.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that decision kind of come from? Even if they aren't like intentionally released as like singles to hype up an album, and also just when were these songs written? How did they kind of come about as far as like songs that you took out of your notebooks and edited down, recorded, and 3 out of the 4, at least right now, are listenable on the websites.
Well, I hope they're
the internet,
listenable.
the websites, the streaming services online and whatnot.
Maybe some people would say they're unlistenable.
I hope not. And if they do, they don't need to say that to you, because that's, unless you want them to tell you that. That would be very mean.
Delicate, sensitive.
That'd be very unkind for someone to just walk up to you and be like, hey, this is unlistenable. No one wants to hear that.
I would take it. I don't know. Because it means they paid attention, I guess.
There is a little, still not the best. But anyways.
The question.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I like short stuff, like in music, and I guess in most forms of communication. And my thinking was that with these 4 standalone singles and with the record, I would hope that keeps someone's focus up more.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, there's some of my favorite records to listen to. Like, I still wish they had made a little bit shorter. I can think of a few specifics, but it's like, if there's like outros, it's like, cut it. It's like, I like stuff that is punchy, and I don't mean that it would be cheap. I just mean that you're saying what you need to say in a smaller amount of time. So that was my hope. I was like, I want this album to not feel long-winded. And so what is it, 8 songs that are left?
Yes.
To me, that doesn't feel extraneous. Whereas 12, I think by the last 2 tracks, you might feel a little bit of fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's honestly the main reason. Just keep people's focus up.
Well, I guess kind of an alternative thing is, even without like putting these songs on the track list for this record and having it be longer and still maintaining that, like, that relatively like punchy 8-song track list, why put these songs out as singles versus like saving them for another EP or album or other release, even if they're already recorded and whatnot? Was the reason why you want to put these ones out specifically just at all versus like other songs that maybe have gone unreleased that you are still tinkering with or still need to sit down and edit? Or even why didn't you save these songs was that an option to save these for another release or something more, I guess, boxed in versus just loose singles? Because loose singles can stand alone as their own thing, and that's great. But especially if you were kind of conscientious of, I don't want these to be on an album so I can keep that album more succinct, what was kind of the mindset in putting out these songs?
That is a stellar question. I mean, like you said, I think it is that standalone thing. It's like, my hope is that all of these songs tell a story in isolation. But I mean, I think since like pop music has been a thing, the format has always really been the song. Mm-hmm. And I'm a huge album person. That's almost exclusively how I listen to music, just because I like to. And I definitely think of my own material at the end of the day as album format. But to me, it's like what people probably want is like, this is a new song. I'm going to listen to it and I will, crossing my fingers, be like paying attention for the whole 4 minutes of it. And I guess I'm not confident that that's a guarantee for most people, myself included, for like a 45-minute LP.
Okay. Good answer. Yeah. That sums that up. That's again kind of connecting with like you just talk about how self-awareness can play a part, because I feel like if you aren't paying attention to that kind of thing and aren't kind of trying to be self-aware in regard to like how art and music are perceived by people who aren't the ones making it, which is a very weird thing for any creative to do. Like, how is someone going to hear this when they hear it without having spent months and months working on it? Because I know how I feel about it.
It's scary.
It's very
like
scary.
Release, like literally release, like emotion. Yeah, way different.
No, release days are always awful. And I'm not even the person who writes the songs. I just show up. Okay, yeah, I think that's as, not that there would have been a bad answer, but I think that's as good of an answer as we could have got. Yeah, A+.
Yeah, I did a fist pump for those listening.
Yes, This is a podcast, so we unfortunately can't relay any of the. Zach's been doing like miming instruments this entire time.
I have, yeah.
Even like pretending to play piano. I think he fake played bass at one point.
It's a habit.
It's been great.
I like to do drums too.
Yeah,
really all of them.
Just so you can imagine that, like,
and I keep
restart the interview, and just listen back, imagining Zach just miming instruments whenever he talks about an instrument, and you'll get that much more out of it.
And I keep nodding when you're speaking.
I mean, I kept going, yeah, Worst ASMR. Anyways, last question about the album. I already kind of asked you about the lyrics, but this is about all of it writ large, and we could even include some of these 4 singles in there. But what are some highlights? What are some of the parts that, if you were to sit down, listen to all 12 of these songs, or even just the 8 songs on the album right now, what are some of the things that really stand out to you? Whether it's something you are responsible for or not, doesn't really matter, but just any highlights, parts that you really appreciate or enjoy about the album and these songs. And on the flip side, what were some of the biggest challenges, or even, I don't want to say highlight, low light, because I don't, like, what was a part that sucked, but just a challenge that was particularly difficult or that stood out to you while you were engaging in this long process of putting together a record. What was some things that stood out to you as challenges to be overcome?
Mm-hmm. So start with the good stuff, start with the bad stuff.
Let's start with the good stuff.
I mean, I'm proud of the singing. I think it's pretty like precise. I think it's very expressive. I hope it's whatever. Like, I think with singing especially, you always want to be improving actively in terms of exercises and whatnot. So to me, that's a highlight. It's a little music nerdy, but just the literal dynamics make me a lot more emotionally excited. I think that when I was writing literal just like pop punk arrangement stuff, that's not a genre that really encourages a lot of dynamic variation. No. And we still did like, this section will be quiet and this section will be loud. But as far as I remember for most of those rehearsals and gigs, that's about all the nuance there is. Whereas just with this grand piano and just with the way I was treating the piano, I think that tells the story of the lyrics a lot better. And honestly, when I think about that record, that's the first thing I think about.
Okay.
Which a younger me would not, I think, have even had the foresight to like think about. Those are highlights.
Yeah.
Strings is a huge highlight.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's most of the stuff, I think. And then again, just like treating the songs like they're compositions, like having a little bit more grandiosity to how do we support the lyrics. I think that's,
instead of just like, these are the chords that sound nice and I can sing over them. I can sing these lyrics over them, instead of taking that extra step and how does this serve the arc of the song, or how does this connect to the lyrics that I'm singing here? Which I think is a very theatrical, very musical theater oriented way of thinking. And I think that's something that can be extracted from that and applied to a lot of different genres. and almost to inject some personal bias, I think more should do that. But that, I think at least that's where my brain goes when anyone kind of talks about the music and the instruments directly supporting the lyrics and the singing in that way, like that specific way, because obviously you hope that they go together. That's pretty low bar for music.
You never know, though.
True. You want at least that, though. You're like, oh, they sound well together. Nice. But they don't always serve each other, I guess. But I think that's a really interesting thing to, I think, listen for. So since this may be coming out before the album, remember to listen for that when it does come out.
Mm-hmm.
Giving homework to all the fans.
There you go. Yeah, who doesn't like homework?
All the Zaq Baker heads are big fans of homework. The heads.
ZB heads.
Yeah, so what were some of the challenges or some of the points that were little bit points of contention, I suppose?
It sounds like such a fallback to just say like mental illness, but it is a huge inhibitor of productivity.
No, it is, and
Yeah.
just because it's all like it's very relatable for a lot of people, that doesn't like diminish its how big of a part it can play.
If you're a music fan, you have some mental illness. Why else?
Oh, you like music?
Yeah.
You must be mentally ill.
Right. Why are you so emotionally excited by recordings? You know, that's weird.
Yeah. Why do you like WAV files, dude? What's up with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that is funny is, so I recorded with Rob Genetic, who's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
He and I have worked together on, I think, 4 or 5 of my records. We've worked together on, I think, at least 2 other people's records, and he mixed and mastered Cardio and Maddie's Delivery Service. So Rob is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Something that was really funny was that I play piano very hard. Like I just hit it really hard. And I think that's from playing in rock bands for so long. And so every single day we did the sessions, he would have to tune it in the morning, and we would like have to take a break in the afternoon, and he would have to tune it again on the same day, which I think is hilarious. But at the time it was kind of like, this is a funny problem. And he was literally like, you play too fucking hard. Like, why do you play so fucking hard? And I'm looking at the piano and I'm like, I'm not.
This is just how I play.
Yeah, I was like, do you want to see hard? This is what it is, but I'm actually not playing that hard. And he was kind of like, this instrument is like this beautiful, I think it was Yamaha, built in like 75. And it's like literally an old, beautiful machine. And I'm like hitting it really hard with my hands. So it's something that's very funny now, but I suppose that was like a challenge.
A pain in the moment.
Yeah. And then I think for me, like singing, I am not a trained singer. I've done a lot of training with Maria over the last like 4 or 5 years. But for me, whenever I go in to record, it's very like note for note, try to the extent possible to like exercise myself into being good at it. And to me, that's a lot more daunting than all the other parts of music. That's always a challenge. I think the result I'm happy with, which I can't
proud of the work
say.
you put into it.
Yeah. But definitely as like, what was challenging? It's like, well, that took a lot of time and a lot of work. And sometimes that's not that fun to do like lip trills, I think.
Well, I think that's something that pretty much everyone that we talk to can't relate to that. Like here, at least here on the podcast, because like for a lot of like punk or indie rock or hardcore bands and anything, like there's different kinds of vocal training that goes into that, but it isn't necessarily the type that requires you to sit at home and do like vocal warm-ups. And like another thing that at least I, in my sick little brain, associate with musical theater, just having been around that for so long, it's like, like vocal warm-ups, you do that every time. You have to do that every time, and there are very obvious and clear reasons why you need to do that every time. But a lot of singers probably don't need to do that for the styles of music that they make, even if they have to do other kinds of like prep and warming up, or maybe even should. But I think that's kind of like I don't say underrated, that's not underrated, undermentioned challenge. Undermentioned challenge for especially the kind of very like straight, like it's a very vocally and lyrically driven album, and that's been your style of songwriting. So it makes sense that you'd want to put extra time and all of that training, which is a pain in the ass to do, into it to make sure it's like, no, I need this to happen in order to make these songs work. Whereas everyone else is like, I'll play guitar, yay. And then they're just like kind of like yelling and it's awesome.
Yeah,
But
I love that.
it's not,
just to be super
yeah,
clear.
yeah.
Yeah.
No one's knocking the other. You usually don't have to do vocal warm-ups when you're just kind of doing that sort of thing. So I think it's interesting. It's very cool that you mentioned that. That was mostly just like 2 minutes of me just riffing about like vocal warm-ups. Crazy, man.
Important.
Important.
Yeah.
Very true. Yeah, that pretty much summarizes all I had to ask you about the album. It'll be coming out relatively maybe soonish. We don't want to put anything out there just because I'm not sure if it's been locked in or if you're just still kind of deciding on the right time. Don't want to put words in your mouth, but it'll be coming soon.
Well, to qualify it, like Rob finished the mix and master, I think in September, but to me, because of the like very depressive flavor of most of the album, I was like, this has to come out in like the dead of winter.
Mm-hmm.
So I was targeting December, and then I was kind of like, January, why not? Drop it at like the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So the next single, I just did the distribution thing or whatever. So that's December 17th. And then I think the album I will do in January.
Stay tuned for January then. I like ending every interview with the same question, which you're making a face, so maybe you've listened before. I certainly haven't.
I
but
certainly haven't.
what are some of the local or like maybe just underground, smaller artists or bands that you've been listening to and enjoying lately? They can be people you know, people you've never met, but I find I always just love getting people to kind of shout out either their friends or the people that they're listening to lately. So yeah, feel free to shout out a couple artists or bands if you want now.
Yeah. Have you listened to Linus before? They're so awesome. I'm
Like
almost
spelled the same as the Charlie Brown character?
Yeah.
I can't say that I have.
Yeah. They were added to one of the same playlists that I got added to. And so I listened to their record and it's awesome.
Are they local or just a random band you came across?
Yeah, I'm almost positive they're local. I hope they are. I think their bio is like, we are a Minneapolis band, LOL.
That
I
would
think
imply that they're local.
Yeah, but it's just this like wonderful, not to reiterate what you said about me, but it has that like self-deprecating but earnest thing. And they're like love worn or very just like, I'm tired, you know? And it's just like delightful guitar rock.
Okay.
So Linus I love. I always throw out love to Natalie Fiddler because I think she's awesome. And we have a lot of like mutual love, but her songwriting, we both have that like, I grew up on the pop music of the early 2000s and like, she's got such a great sense of humor and such great musicianship. So I would always throw out Natalie as like a really
she's I think finally working on a new record because she recently was like awarded some kind of grant or something or like won some kind of like musical competition to like help fund recording. So hopefully we have new stuff coming from Natalie soon.
Yeah, and Faith Boblet, I love her album. Take Care, it's so good. It's like super profane, which I don't allow myself to do.
Like in like cursing or in like the like religious or like
the S word and the F word are just like fixtures in the writing, and it's awesome.
Hell yeah.
And it's just really good guitar rock with like actual teeth, and she's a great singer. So I like listen to her album pretty regularly. It's great.
Yeah.
Those are a few locals. There's so many though. You know, the list is so long of great bands from
and well, like what we can usually like
God.
expect is like if like each person can name like 2 or 3 maybe, that's I think reasonable because everybody could just keep going.
Yeah.
Or they just list a few and then they're like, I need to check my phone. I'm forgetting somebody. Because
just look at the like Mortimer's calendar, like, oh, I forgot about, you know.
Yeah, or just like look at like your own like
calendar.
Facebook interested page for all the gigs that are finally starting to happen again.
100%.
Not quite the same as when there was like all the house shows were running out of Facebook, but maybe it's a good thing that we've moved away from at least using Facebook for that.
I was about to be like, what's Facebook? You know?
I wish I didn't know. It's meta now. Technology.
Do you remember? Did you see 8th Grade? That
I did.
Movie? Yeah, I always quote the scene where the mom is trying to get the protagonist to go to some pool party, and she's like, "I asked her mom to invite you on Facebook," and she's like, "Mom, nobody uses Facebook anymore." She like slams the minivan door.
Yeah.
It's so classic, and that was like years ago.
That was like that was 2018. And
I think it was.
We've somehow only gone further downhill.
Yeah.
If Facebook is the boulder and we are Sisyphus, we're losing. We're losing so hard right now. And Mark Zuckerberg is just sitting on top of the boulder looking like a lizard man.
You know it.
That's enough talk about Mark Zuckerberg. As we said, record will be coming out, the new Zaq Baker, sometime in the dead of winter. Check out all the last, at least 3 singles that have come out, the back catalog if you haven't checked it out, and the new single, is it Ojos or Ochos?
Ojos, yeah, like the Spanish word.
Yes.
Yeah.
What does the Spanish word mean?
Eyes.
Eyes. Yeah. My Duolingo is failing me on this one. But want to just plug your social media, plug where people can find you and the music you'll be releasing and have released, and we can be good from there.
Yeah, Instagram's the hub, so just find me on Instagram.
The hub.
Yeah, that's where I live my life through my Instagram. It's very sad.
It's a modern
right.
reality.
Yeah, it's current.
That we all accept.
Yeah.
Check them out on Instagram. Check out the music. Thank you so much for stopping by on this Saturday, and glad we could finally get you on the show after 3 years of crossing paths. Trying. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's my pleasure. This is a lot of fun.
The Ear Coffee Podcast is a companion to the blog of the same name. If you like this episode, please leave us a rate and review so we can stand out among the other music podcasts. You can follow us at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram @Ear Coffee. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.